Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to week 17 of the NFL season. This, of course, is No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and being that it is the end of the regular season, this will be the final notable matchups video here on YouTube for No Huddle Fantasy Sports. But we do have one more week of NFL football, and just as we do every single week, we're talking notable matchups, the best matchups, defense versus position statistics, DvP, which players are in the best spots, which defenses give up the most amount of points. All of that information, whether it be for season long or DFS, covered in this video and more, so stay tuned. Hey guys, and welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Welcome back to the channel, the video here on YouTube. This, of course, as I mentioned, is the last notable matchups video for the year, for the season, NFL season. We're talking week 17 here, defense versus position, notable matchups, which players, offenses are in the best spots based upon the entire year's worth of data, so we know which defenses essentially give up the most amount of points. But before we get too far in this video, I do first and foremost wish that everybody is having a wonderful, happy holiday season, a Merry Christmas, and if you guys do have some time off, whether it be from work, school, whatever it might be, I hope you truly are enjoying that time off, spending some quality time with friends, family, watching some college football bowl season, end of the NFL season, and finally, Happy New Year to everybody out there. And the last thing I do want to say here, being that this is the final matchup video for the year, I just want to thank everybody truly from the bottom of my heart. I really do appreciate where this channel has come from and where it is now. It continues to grow each and every week. Started this channel just at the beginning of the season, and it seems like these matchup videos in particular are the most important, the most successful videos that I've put out each and every week. But more importantly, thank you guys for finding this channel, clicking on these videos, supporting No Huddle Fantasy Sports. As I mentioned, each and every week we continue to grow. It's very, very organic. I'm really proud of it, and I'm really happy and really thankful for you guys, that those of you that are subscribed, that follow these videos, give it likes, and support the channel each and every week. I am truly thankful for you guys. Of course, if you followed any of the videos in the past, if you enjoy these videos, if you're looking forward to future fantasy sports, especially MLB, which I'll be doing a lot of in the spring, make sure you are subscribed. It's the easiest way to continue to stay up to date when I put out videos, and it's also the easiest way to simply support the channel. My goal for the new year, for 2020, for this channel, for No Huddle Fantasy Sports, is to hit 1,000 plus subscribers. We're obviously a long way from that point, but it is my goal for 2020, and the easiest way to get there, the first step, is to make sure you watching this video are subscribed to the channel. All that being said, if you didn't get it already, thank you for everything. Thank you for supporting the channel and No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Let's jump into week 17. Let's cap off the end of the regular season on a good note, whether you're playing season long, trying to finish out that championship, or avoiding last place, who knows, or of course if you're playing DFS. All that here, we're going to cover defense versus position data. We have all weeks 1 through 16 to look at now. Kind of things have settled down. It's a useful data source. Of course, it shouldn't be used alone. We talk about it every single week. It's a good start to the week. It's a good way to figure out which teams and which defenses give up the most amount of points. But being that it is the end of 2019 regular season, it is week 17, and we have weeks 1 through 16 kind of in our pocket, that data. We know which teams, which defenses are kind of the teams to attack with certain positions. I thought we could recap, we could talk about that. Could be useful for 2020 season, could be useful for the offseason, but do pay attention to the offseason, because obviously defenses can change, they get better, they add players, they add defensive coordinators. A lot of different things could happen to change the outcome of a defense and how they play. But for this season, what we do know and what has kind of settled out with a lot of data to now look at, for the quarterback position, teams you want to attack with quarterbacks week in and week out, teams that are very susceptible to giving up a ton of fantasy points to quarterbacks, are the Arizona Cardinals and Miami Dolphins. And what's funny here is that it's for different reasons. The Arizona Cardinals, I'm not saying they have a good secondary or a good defense, but it's really because of the pace of play. Obviously, their offense moves very quickly. It's almost a no-huddle constant offense. It's a very college-style offense, meaning there's more volume for opposing teams. So quarterbacks are getting more opportunity, more volume, and as a result, that lends to more fantasy points versus the Cardinals. Miami Dolphins, on the other side, are just a really torn apart defense. They've traded away all of their good players. So just in retrospect, a team that just does not have good defenders, cannot defend the quarterback position, let alone any other position. So for different reasons there, the Arizona Cardinals and Miami Dolphins are teams to attack with quarterbacks. Throughout the season, it seems like for the running back position, we've talked about 3 teams in particular, and that's the Carolina Panthers, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Kansas City Chiefs. Carolina Panthers all season have just struggled versus running backs, especially in the red zone touchdown department. I believe they're definitely number one in terms of touchdowns giving up to running backs, but that's a wide margin. It may even be 10 or more touchdowns more than the second place team right now. I'm not positive on that, but that kind of highlights how bad they have been in terms of fantasy points given up to the running back position. Jacksonville Jaguars, especially over the second half of the season, have just been atrocious in defending running backs, defending the run. I believe just they're giving up on defense. They're one of the worst tackling teams on defense. They give up some of the most yards per carry. Just a really bad defense, a defense that you can trust a running back against, especially a quality running back. And then finally here, the Kansas City Chiefs. For the last couple of years, it's been the same story. Incredible offense, pretty bad or below average defense. They, of course, have kind of turned it around towards the end of the season. But overall, just a team that you can easily attack with running backs. And I think that's kind of game plans for most teams, especially teams like the Patriots. You want to slow that Chiefs offense down. You know that they're bad against the running back position. If you run the ball, you kind of control the game, control the clock a little better. So the Chiefs really bad against the running back position, and that's carried forward since I believe 2018 season. In terms of the wide receiver position, you see a repeat team here in the Miami Dolphins. Kind of same deal as before, just a team that cannot defend, have given up a ton of talent out of their defense, traded away a lot of good players. So of course, if they're giving up a ton to the quarterback position, naturally the wide receiver position is excelling against the Dolphins too. But on top of that, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is funny because they are one of the most split, I guess you would call it, teams in terms of defense versus the run versus the pass. They are one of the best run defending teams in the NFL this year. I'll highlight that a little bit later. But on the flip side, they are one of the worst teams in terms of giving up points to the wide receiver position. So Tampa Bay Buccaneers, constantly in shootouts all season long, giving up tons of points to the wide receiver position. They are a team that easily is attackable with wide receivers. The Philadelphia Eagles, although it didn't show last week when I started and a lot of people started Amari Cooper against them, they have struggled all season long against wide receivers. Their secondary in particular, another team that's really good against the run, but really bad against the pass. Their secondary in particular struggles against elite number one receivers. So if you're talking about a guy that's a top 10 receiver, he is almost surely going to score a massive amount of points versus the Eagles secondary. So again, wide receiver position versus the Eagles, a good spot to be in. And lastly here, the tight end position, everybody's favorite position. There's not as much data on this, of course, as other positions, considering tight ends don't get as much usage, volume. There's less of them on the field than other positions. But in terms of which teams give up the most amount of points, basically since week one, the Arizona Cardinals have averaged 1+ touchdown given up to the tight end position in every single game. A team that we've talked about week in and week out. You can stream cheap tight ends versus them, value guys. You can stream elite tight ends against them. It doesn't matter. They're a matchup, a great matchup for the tight end position. For whatever reason, they struggle at defending the tight end, especially in the red zone. Next up here, though, is a team that kind of falls just behind them. It's the Seattle Seahawks. A bit surprising, but I believe Bobby Wagner is one of the worst in terms of defending the tight end in 2019, or any type of inside receiver, tight end type of player. He has given up a ridiculous amount of yards trying to defend them. So again, a team that you can attack with tight ends. Just matchups are just not working in terms of their linebackers versus the tight end position, and it showed throughout this season. And quickly here, I wanted to highlight, if you see here popping up at the bottom, kind of the opposite. So which teams have been elite? Well, basically the Patriots, whether it's quarterback, running back, or wide receiver, they're tough to play against. They have an elite defense. We've known this for a couple of years now. It got so much better this year somehow. But if you're starting any of these positions, you might want to think twice if the Patriots are on the schedule. Of course, for the quarterback position, the other team I wanted to highlight are the Buffalo Bills. Excellent defense this year, play within themselves, and a good, especially if you're playing in Buffalo, a good defense versus the quarterback position in terms of preventing points. Running back position, I already talked about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in terms of being a split where they cannot defend wide receivers. On the flip side, they are a top team versus the running back position. They defend the running back very, very well. Not a team you want to stream a running back against. And then you have the wide receiver position. I've also listed the Kansas City Chiefs, another team that has a pretty drastic split, gets crushed by the running back position, but is able to do a decent job defending their own versus wide receivers. And finally here, the tight end position. Again, it's tough to really judge tight ends because of the low volume, the low data that we have to run off of. But the Baltimore Ravens and Carolina Panthers have stood out as teams that really have not given up a ton of points, fantasy points to the tight end position. So teams that you may want to avoid or you should have avoided throughout the year. And so that really wraps up the 2019 season, kind of giving a highlight of what we've talked about throughout the season and how things have really shaped up. A lot of those teams we've talked about week in and week out in terms of giving up a ton of points to fantasy position, and you see them at the end of the season being the worst. On the flip side, we also know which teams you might want to avoid, especially teams like the Patriots who just simply are elite versus almost every position. But as always, we would like to quickly look at week 16. We are jumping into week 17 here, but we like to look back to week 16, see if there's any notes we want to take advantage of. I have the Miami Dolphins here. We've talked about them being a great matchup for quarterbacks throughout the season. Andy Dalton threw for 396 yards last week and 4 touchdowns versus them. Obviously, Andy Dalton got benched this year, isn't having a great season. The Bengals in general are just a mess on offense, a mess in total, but nonetheless, the Miami Dolphins, being as bad as they are, got crushed by him. They've given up 300 plus passing yards and 22 plus fantasy points on average over the last 4 games. So again, just a great team to attack and stream quarterbacks again. I want to talk about the New York Giants here, another team that continues to struggle versus the quarterback position. Last week, we saw a very bad Washington offense. I really don't have much faith in Haskins, but he played and he got hurt, and then you had Case Keenum come in. The combo of 2 guys, one of them not meant to even start, the other one I don't think is even a NFL starter quality quarterback, threw for 281 passing yards and 3 touchdowns versus the Giants, 125 plus quarterback rating, so a really good quarterback rating, meaning that defense just simply could not stop the quarterbacks in that game. They are number 3 in terms of fantasy points given up to the quarterback position over the last 4 games. So again, the Giants just looking bad over the last few weeks versus quarterbacks. Last week in week 15, I talked about the Rams and their inability to stop the run over the last couple of games. Well, that continued into week 16. We saw the combo of San Francisco running backs. So they didn't really start one guy in particular. We know they're kind of a 3-headed monster. Nonetheless, combined, they rushed for 119 yards and had a 5.2 yards per carry average. To cap it all off, they had 2 total touchdowns. So the Rams struggled again last week versus the running back position, simply haven't been able to defend the running back position over the last couple of weeks. In fact, they've given up 382 rushing yards over the last 2 weeks, and that's again not limited to elite backs. It's not like they're facing Elliott's and backs that are getting a ton of exposure and a ton of volume because they're elite backs. These are a bunch of random guys put together rushing right down the throat of the Rams defense. Another team, Jacksonville Jaguars, on my list, the end of the season list of a team you can attack with running backs. We saw last week Atlanta running backs rush for 135 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Plus, I think Freeman had a reception touchdown through the air, 119 rushing yards per game and 36 plus fantasy points given up per game over the last 4 weeks for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that I think is just giving up. So whoever's playing them this week, in a good spot. And finally here, Carolina Panthers. They are number 1 this season in terms of fantasy points given up on average per game. Marlon Mack, he was in a smash spot last week. We all played him, had 95 rushing yards, a 5.9 yard per carry average, so really good average there, and 1 rushing touchdown. They allowed 3 rushing touchdowns last week, and again, they lead all defenses, so here's the stat with 29 rushing touchdowns. That is far and above second place or any other team in the NFL, simply just giving up a ridiculous amount of touchdowns to Carolina Panthers. So I hope that information is helpful to you guys moving into week 17, moving into anything you might do throughout the playoffs here, and then of course taking that into 2020. But of course, let's recap here. Let's talk about the quarterback position going into week 17. If you haven't done so already, there is a link in the description where you can get all of this data on spreadsheets absolutely free. Just simply click the link. But we're talking about the Arizona Cardinals, Miami Dolphins, Houston Texans, New York Giants, and Oakland Raiders as the top 5 defenses going into week 17 in terms of fantasy points given up to the quarterback position. I'll just talk about a couple here. Arizona Cardinals, 23 plus on DraftKings, 22 plus on FanDuel. Jared Goff in a good spot this week versus the Cardinals. Miami Dolphins, we talk about them. They play Tom Brady, who not necessarily having an elite fantasy season, but in a good spot versus the Dolphins. I believe a game they have to play to try to lock up that number 1 or number 2 home field advantage seed. Houston Texans here. I love Tannehill. I've loved him over the last couple of weeks, in a good spot versus the Texans. New York Giants, Carson Wentz in a good spot. Another guy that's got to play. The Eagles got to play to win because they could easily fall out of the playoffs with a loss to the Giants. And then Oakland here. Drew Lock had a couple of good weeks here, so if you want to take a chance here with a Denver Broncos quarterback, maybe the quarterback of the future for them, Drew Lock in a good spot versus the Oakland Raiders. For the running back position, our top 5 teams giving up the most amount of points going into week 17 to the running back position on average per game: Carolina Panthers, Jacksonville Jaguars, Washington Redskins, Detroit Lions, and then finally here, Kansas City Chiefs. We've talked about a couple of these teams already in terms of the entire season as a whole. Carolina just easily number 1 here at 31 plus on DraftKings, 29 plus on FanDuel. A great team in terms of touchdowns. I talked about that already. Kamara in a good spot. He scored a couple of times last week. Hasn't scored much this season. Positive regression maybe, if you believe in that. Could easily score here versus the Panthers. We have the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that I've loved to attack over the last few weeks. Marlon Mack in a good spot versus them. A guy that should get heavy volume in a good spot. Washington Redskins, elite spot for Ezekiel Elliott, an elite back. So again, a good spot for a good back here. The Detroit Lions, of course, this week playing the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones probably crushed a lot of people, including myself. Playoff championship hopes last week. But he's in a good spot. A guy that's kind of turning the corner towards the end of the season, kind of putting it away, has a ton of touchdowns. So in a good spot versus the Lions. And Kansas City here, Melvin Gordon, maybe going to have a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. Last game, possibly last game for the Chargers here versus the Chiefs here, who round up the top 5 in terms of teams giving up the most amount of points to running backs. For wide receivers, we're talking about Tampa Bay, Miami, New York Giants, Detroit, and then the New Orleans Saints as top tier teams to attack with wide receivers. Tampa Bay far and above the number 1 team here at 44 plus points in PPR sites, DK. FanDuel, you're looking at 36, 37 points on average. We're talking about a good spot for the Atlanta receivers here. Unfortunately, we don't have Calvin Ridley, but Julio Jones in a good spot. They play this guy named Gage a little bit. Austin Hooper, if you want to take a shot at a tight end, not necessarily the best spot for tight ends in terms of DvP, but certainly a good receiver. So again, good spot for the Atlanta Falcon receivers. Miami playing, if you want to start that Tom Brady stack, maybe you want to put Edelman and Sanu in. Sanu might be sneaky here versus a very weak Miami team. Any of the wide receivers that you might know of for the Eagles versus the Giants here, I listed Ward. I'm not sure who else you would even play. For the Detroit Lions, you're looking at obviously Devontae Adams, an elite receiver. Allison. There's a lot of different secondary receivers for the Packers you could start against that weak Detroit Lions secondary. And then finally here, we have the New Orleans Saints secondary rounding out the top 5 in terms of points given up to the wide receiver position. You have Moore and you have Sandals. Love Moore, having a great season. Going to be an elite receiver, I believe, for years to come. I don't know if Allen's playing, so it might not be the best spot to start receivers, especially not knowing how this game will play out. And lastly here is the tight end position. If you couldn't guess already, based upon previous weeks, I don't think they ever left the number 1 spot. We have the Arizona Cardinals giving up the single most amount of points, the steadiest, most consistent team in terms of points given up to the tight end position, almost guaranteed to give up a touchdown this week. Arizona Cardinals giving up 19 plus on DraftKings PPR sites, FanDuel at number 16, far and above anything given up by the second place team here, which is the Seattle Seahawks. But I mentioned they play Goff, he's in a good spot. Tyler Higbee, he played last week. He did really well, even with Garrett back. I love Higbee. I think he's a talented tight end in a good spot. It's just kind of worrisome. What will they do here, especially considering their season is pretty much lost. Seattle Seahawks, though, another team you want to attack with tight ends. George Kittle, you start him almost every week, but in a good spot versus Seahawks. Dallas Cowboys, you're playing Sprinkle if you want to go that route. Washington, you have Jason Witten, could be one of his last games here of his career. Kansas City, and you have Henry. I do love Henry. I'm really worried, and you should be too, how some of these teams play that really aren't running for anything. So I don't know how that'll play out with Henry. But nonetheless, those are your top 5 teams that you can attack with tight ends in week 17. And so that about wraps it up. I'm sorry this video is a bit lengthy compared to previous weekly videos, but I did want to do a couple extra things here. I wanted to make sure I did a recap of the season, considering the regular season is over. So we kind of know where we are, where we came from. Of course, I wanted to give you guys a big thank you for following along on this channel, clicking the videos, making sure these videos continue to get views, making sure this is a useful video, giving me comments, suggestions. We've made alterations to the video. We included cheat sheets, all that good stuff. It's all because of you guys, and I do really, really appreciate that. I mentioned the goal for 2020 is to hit 1,000 subscribers. So again, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you hit that damn subscribe button. It's really freaking simple. All you got to do is click it. You're subscribed to the channel. I don't spam you. I don't email you. I don't blow you up with 15 videos a day. It's simply an easy way to stay tuned to the channel when I do put out videos, and it's an easy way to help support the channel. Of course, I mentioned I will be doing baseball videos in the spring. So again, if you're into that stuff, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And if you notice here, last thing I do want to mention, if you haven't been with me prior to this video, I do publish spreadsheets. So all the stuff we talked about in terms of fantasy football, defense versus position data, I only talk about the top 5 matchups. But if you want all rankings, 1 through 32, completely updated, including which team is the average team, and so you know which are above, which are below, all that information split out by quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end is available to you down in the description. It's a simple link. You don't have to provide an email. You don't have to click anything, sign up to anything like that. It's simply a link to download spreadsheets from WeTransfer, I believe is the name of the website. But again, all updated information, cheat sheets for you guys to use as you set your lineups in DFS or finish out the season and season long. With all of that said, I hope you guys are enjoying the holiday season, enjoying some college football bowl games, looking forward to week 17. Let's crush this last week of the season. Of course, Happy New Year to you guys, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video.